to put it out to you, really. If you can come up with any sort of ideas about how we could engage in the community on this. Obviously, council will do its usual communications, but I mean, I think there's an opportunity for sort of smaller scale, sort of ward-based activity. And if anybody has got any ideas, I know that members' budget funding is available for such things. I did drop you a note about that, Rose Garfield. I apologise, I missed you off the distribution, but that was just my opening gambit, really. To maybe we can come back to discussing it later. Okay, minutes of the last meeting. Oh, do we have any matters arising from the previous minutes? I can't
Apologies,
see.
I'm on mute. We went through the 23rd of November meetings, but they've been bunched together because obviously it was a two-part meeting, so I'll just skip to the next one, but I don't think there's any particular actions as such, really. But apologies for the agenda, because what I forgot to put on was apologies, and we have had a couple of apologies from Kenny Murray, John Walker and Alex Holt from Public Health, but I've made a note of those, so apologies for that omission.
Okay, thanks, Christy. So the minutes of the meetings then, is everybody happy to accept them as a true and accurate record? Yes, okay, thank you. I can see, it does say that there's one person with the hand up, but I can't actually see who it is. I think there's a gremlin in Teams. Is there anybody waiting to speak? Please just shout out if you are. No, okay. So item 3 then was to discuss the programme of meetings and thinking about the year ahead and how often we have the meetings, and in particular how we're going to sort of structure them. And at this juncture, Garfield, I'd like to hand over to yourself just to share some of your thoughts and ideas around this, and then perhaps we can open it up for discussion. That's okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I think at we can probably go back a couple of meetings to the last Sustainable Transport Task Force meeting, where it was felt that the meetings were too regular. It wasn't really enough time for things to develop between the meetings, and also I think the evening slot was seen by many as being prohibitive. It was not useful. So it was clear from that point of view that we needed a new pattern. I think 2 suggestions came out time-wise. I think some people were saying 2 months, some were saying 3 between the meetings. I think 2 feels about right for me. You just give a bit more time. 3 only really leaves kind of 4 meetings a year, which I just wonder how useful that would be. But anyway, that's for discussion. And then as far as the timing goes, I think there was a preference to try and move the timings to be something like we are today, and maybe an evening one, and mix the times up a little bit so different people had you know, an opportunity to attend the meetings. So I think those were the main points that kind of came up historically, and certainly at the last meeting of this group, those were the kind of views shared. But I just wonder if colleagues around the table have got any other thoughts about what intervals we might use.
Thanks, Garfield. And I think that's a good place to open up the discussion. And I've got one hand, and that's Andy. Is it Andy Farrell?
Yeah, thanks. In the first meeting, a work programme for this meeting was being talked about, and indeed it was deferred until the last meeting, and it never happened there either. Surely the frequency of meetings and the programme of meetings is all about what the work programme is, actually. So it may be an idea, maybe for next meeting now, to actually start either discussion or a presentation of what the work programme for this group is. Otherwise, we'll just wander from, you know, point to point and fashionable discussion point to another one. It'd be useful to get some sort of work programme and fit the meetings around that.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Rose, can I bring you in?
Yeah, sorry. Thanks for that, Andy. When you say work programme, do you mean sort of a forward programme of what we want to consider, think about and engage on as part of this? If you wouldn't just mind sort of explaining what work programme, by what you mean by that.
I think you just got it. You just said it.
Yeah, a forward plan of activity for the group.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Okay, so we've been talking about that quite a lot in the background, and actually we were Councillor Shaw and Garfield, myself and Christy were saying that actually this meeting is a little bit too much of us talking and board fully. So it's not meant to be a here's what we know, here's a big download, and let's not have any interaction and we'll just tell you lots of things. And that's absolutely the opposite of what we're trying to get to with the meetings. But for this one, because we're kind of just getting into our stride and just kind of like getting going, we've been doing quite a lot of work in the background with others such as Crag and to ask about the cycling event that we're thinking about. So we're starting to build up that forward programme of topics to discuss, and then when we start to get a little bit of a body of that, we'll publish it in advance, and then you can add in or you can suggest changes. So absolutely, Andy, that's definitely where we want to go with this. But just for this one, we're kind of still a little bit in too much Cheshire West and Chester and not enough participation, but we're starting to change that.
That's okay. That's fine.
Rose, if I can just add to that as well, I think that there are some work streams, if it's right to say, that will soon come to a crescendo, and then there will be a lot of added value that I think this group could bring to those work streams, but we're just waiting on a few pieces of the jigsaw to come together first. Yeah, okay, all right, thank you. I've got Mike Garrett, I'll bring him in next.
Hi, thanks. I'd just like to endorse what Andy just said, really, and to make the point that there are outstanding work streams, if you like, from the STTF, not least of which was the great piece of work Andy did himself. But it wasn't the only one. There was the other corridor studies, the Crystalton study, and work that came out of those. So I think we're not starting from a blank sheet of paper here. And I think it's important that those pieces of work are picked up on. We think about the feedback from those, Kevin Riley's commentary on them, which we haven't seen, and just to endorse the point, we need a work programme which allows initiatives to come from all directions.
Okay, Mike, thank you. I'm bringing Garfield next, and then I bring Rose back in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I mean, replying to Andy's comments and then to Mike's as well, I'm hoping that we will have a substantial work programme. I mean, that's the whole point of us being here, is to contribute to the council's work and improve matters generally. So I'm hoping that there will be several strands going, in which case then it might be difficult to align meetings to a particular strand. So it may be that each one becomes a progress report on the different strands that are going on. So I think, as Rose was saying, you know, there are a number of things which are kind of bubbling under, I suppose is the best way of looking at it, which you're ready to kind of bring to the group and get your views on and get your input on, and they, I think, will develop work streams in themselves. Okay, thanks, Garfield. Rose, can I bring you in there?
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Garfield. And so Mike, I have had some conversations with Stephen Perry about this in the background, and I know he said that you'd probably try to raise it today. The update on we had our first meeting and we broke it into two sections, and then the second section was me sort of reading pretty much verbatim what Kevin Riley had reported back to us on the schemes. So that update was actually me pretty much verbatim reading out what Kevin's report back to us at the council was on where the schemes were, where they were up to. And what we're hoping to do here is move us to the art of the possible and actually put us in the realms of possibility in terms of what we can deliver. So I was really hoping that first session had kind of reset it a little bit to say, thank you for all the work done. It's not been forgotten. It's absolutely there. We've got all of the updates and all the material that sit behind it. But as projects, we haven't got the money or the policy envelope to actually move any of those forward in at the moment. But what they haven't done is gone away. They're still there. We still have it. We still have all of that work. And what we're going to try to do is bring certain pieces of it forward, such as the corridor study. So I've tasked Kevin with going away and examining that one in a little bit more detail. But I'm really hoping that this group can recognise the thanks, the appreciation, but the need to move forward in the art of, with the art of the possible, in the realm of the possible, and move us to some kind of new ideas that actually might get delivered, because those ones that we talked about are not yet sort of either funded or sat within the LC whip or other kind of like policy or structural envelopes that we can deliver in. Mike, I don't know whether that seems a fair comment, or do you want to come back on
that? Well, if I can come back, I don't think, maybe I don't see the world as specific projects which need to be funded, rather that there are directions of travel and policy. And back to the point that Andy was making, I think it was Andy at the last meeting, that some, as it were, directions of travel can be self-funding. They don't necessarily involve going cap in hand to the department and competing for funds, which is not a very safe direction of travel, given what we've seen with bus funding in the last week or so. So rather, I would have thought that the work streams are not specifically or necessarily designed to deliver a particular physical outcome, but rather policies.
So in that case, then that's exactly where we are going. That we're actually got pieces of work commissioned at the moment to look at alternative funding sources. We're not looking to the DFT. We're not looking to centralised government. We're looking at lots and lots of different ways of doing it. And the purpose of this group is to explore all of those avenues and bring those programmes forward, but trying not to look back too much and trying to take it forward, but based exactly on the principles that you've just set out there.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Rose. I'm going to bring Vanessa in, Vanessa Bond. Crag.
It's actually my colleague Tony that's.
Okay.
Hello, we're double act.
Apologies.
We're a double act. We're perhaps a little bit unclear on what the sort of overall format and agenda was for this, but now we're discussing, as Andy said, the work programme, which I think we all agree with. It's crucial to have a kind of framework of ideas that we can discuss in these forums. Would it be helpful if the various members, certainly like Crag, brought forward a list of the initiatives that they're currently working on, which would fit into this? Because one of the fears that we have is there's a number of initiatives that are being tabled by our sort of resident group, and Rose, you mentioned one earlier, but we're a long way yet from bringing that forward, that need wider discussion and need wider integration to the various things that are going on in the city, not just physically, but we agree with you, Rose, from a policy perspective as well. There's a need for policy support for some of these ideas. So perhaps if each of the members brought forward a list that we submitted, and then there's some way of taking that list and filtering it into a series of agenda workshops, with some stuff to be prioritised and so on. And because we do need a framework of ideas which we can discuss, and some will need more priority than others.
Okay. Going to bring Steve Hughes in at that stage, and then I'll add a few comments as well.
Hi, yeah, I was just going to support what not Vanessa, Tony was saying. I like the idea of bringing forward kind of initiatives, but also kind of maybe even more broad than certain initiatives. The one that comes to mind is, as we get more information on Chris Ballman's new role as Active Travel England and what that exactly means for councils and how we can tie the various initiatives into that. And I guess we'll all be kind of following the news updates that come out on that. But if you as Quack get more information than is widely available to the press, then it'd be really useful, I guess, for us thinking about. In my mind, I'm thinking about the sustainability forum and the kind of the campaigns that we're looking to run. If we can tie into that, and just so we have a broad knowledge of that, I think it might be useful for all of the initiatives that I guess we're carrying out in our individual groups. Might be useful as well.
Okay, I mean, Rose, do you want to come in at that stage, or
Yeah.
before I do? Yeah.
Fantastic. Cheers, Karen. Thank you. Steve, that's absolutely what we're here to do. So we've got actually having a briefing internally on Active Travel England, its powers, what it's set up to do, what it what that localities element looks like, what centrally it looks like, what is it a funding, is it index linked, you know, where does it fit in and how do we fit into it? And we can absolutely ask for a presentation on that to be brought to the group so that you can feel informed and know exactly the direction of travel, literally from the DFT on Active Travel England. That's exactly the kind of suggestion that we'd love to transform this meeting into being about an agenda that you're setting, that we're facilitating.
I think it transcends so much, so I think it would be really useful. And feel free to disagree, everybody, if you're not on board with that idea.
Yeah, I think the only other point I was going to make, Karen, based on what Tony and others have been saying, is that we've just got to be, I suppose, this group. We absolutely invite, I mean, Christy's sort of gone out to a couple of people and said, would you like to update us on X, Y and Z today? But if you want to put forward to us what you feel, you know, good agendas look like and what sort of content you'd like on that and what would be helpful, then absolutely this is a forum to facilitate that. But what we're very keen to do is to keep it within that sort of art of the possible almost, while being ambitious, while being forward looking, keep it within something that we know will kind of get us to a good point where we'll start to deliver things, we'll start to see things change on the ground. So I think there's got to be that happy tension between discussing things, but then us also saying within this policy format, we think this might be, you know, the best, most realistic way of taking something like this forward, just so that we don't become what we were in the past, perhaps, where there was lots of brilliant ideas, but, you know, a lot of the time not implementable. So that's the kind of compromise that we're trying to reach with this group. I don't know whether you agree, Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree, Rose. It's finding the right balance. But we are more than happy for Sustainability Forum, Steve, or Crag to come forward and sort of feed into that. And I think that going forward and as we move through the next few months, we'll be able to sort of have a bit more of a framework around what are our priorities, because from the wish list needs to come the key priorities, the strategic priorities, and the things that we know that we can work on together. I'm going to be completely honest. It's in terms of some of the bigger projects, it's a little bit up in the air at the moment because we don't actually know how it's going to land. And BSIP being one example, you know, Mini Holland. There are numerous examples. The Chris Boardman thing is exciting, but again, we don't know enough. So I hear all of the things that people are saying, but from a strategic point of view, I think there's still a few more things we need to pull together to be able to have that framework and to be able to add value. Is that fair comment, Rose? Yeah. And also, Karen, you know, we're a county-wide, we're a borough-wide group, so there's lots of activity in Chester because that's where a lot of people live, and there's lots of ambition from this group. But we've got to remember that we're a county and multimodal. We're an integrated transport, so that is bus and walking and cycling and all of those other initiatives. I'm just picking up a note that Vanessa and Tony have put in the chat. Achievable. Crag have a short list of deliverable initiatives. So it'd be good to get an update on that, perhaps. You know, in the intervening period between now and the next meeting, and we can discuss offline how to bring that to this group, if that's okay with the two of you. Okay. Steve, have you still got your hand up to speak? Legacy hand.
Apologies, yeah, it is. My bad.
Okay, all right. I mean, do we need to take a discussion offline with a small group of people, perhaps from Crag, from Sustainability Forum, just to sort of have a chat about that and have it concreted up for the next sort of next meeting, Rose? Do you think that would be a way forward?
Yeah, I think in the first instance, we really are interested in everything everyone from the group has, you know, wants to kind of have on the table. But then we maybe take that long list and sort of create a short list of what that work programme looks going forward with a consensus view. I just saw you doing a funnel movement, Tony, and I think, does that capture that?
Yeah, okay.
Well,
Okay,
we've got our meeting on the 15th anyway, haven't we, Rose? We're between ourselves and Craig. So if there's any more ideas, we can bring it to then, I guess. And yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Good stuff. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to then, if there's no more comments, I'm going to move on to the next item 4. And Steve Pemberton's kindly agreed to speak to us, but he does have to leave early, hence bringing it forward in the agenda. So Steve, can I hand it over to you?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Shaw. I was asked to present on our experience of using the Cheshire West and Chester crowdfunding scheme, which first exercise concluded just before Christmas, and we successfully engaged with it. So I'm going to talk about our experience and what we learned and what's good about it and what we need to be working on. So I'll launch straight into slides. Thanks, Christy. You're going to, when I nod my head, you can click or I will signal in some way. Yeah, Cycle North Cheshire is a group that I currently chair. We were formed about 10 years ago, and the initial brief was to promote cycling as a preferred transport method. Although increasingly we're looking at not just cycling, we've started engaging with walking and wheeling, because in general, what's good for cyclists is good for walking and wheeling. I guess there will be some exceptions to that, but the general principle is true. We're centred largely on Frodsham, Helsby and the surrounding villages, so perhaps a little bit more rural, certainly if you get up to Delamere and those sorts of areas. Frodsham and Helsby is the hub. And we have links to local other cycling groups, Cycling UK, Chester Cycling Campaign, of which I'm an active member as well. We've got links into Wirral. So we tend to be fairly well connected in the what I call cycling activism world. And we were active members of the Active Travel Forum, and we were on the committee, the group that drafted the LCWIP, the Local Cycling and Walking Infrastructure Plan. Thanks, Christy. If we look at why people don't cycle more, hence really what the hurdles in front of us are going to be over the coming years, there's lots and lots of independent studies, and it doesn't matter who does the study. The two major outcomes are always the same, and they're both related to people's fear. And some of it is unrealistic in truth, having ridden for over 60 years now without any major issues. But people are resistant to cycling because they fear shared space with other motorised users, and that's particularly true of lorries, vans, tractors, buses, and the way that they pass closely to cyclists on some occasions makes people feel threatened by it. So item 1 really leads to the agenda of more segregation, more separate paths for cyclists. It also says number 1, that's my maths, not my mine. Poor quality road surfaces which are uncomfortable or unsafe for cyclists. And this goes far beyond the issue of potholes, which the council have by and large a reasonable scheme for addressing. But there are surfaces which are uncomfortable stroke unsafe for cyclists which don't meet that standard. And I would say, going back to the end of the previous discussion, in terms of going forward, those two issues should be somehow woven into the core activities of the ISTT, maybe as subgroups of how we can work collaboratively to address these two through the LCWIP, and also to pick up on surfaces. Thanks, Chrissy. So this is Cycling UK, and if you look at, I think it's the 3rd paragraph down, more than half of respondents were worried about sharing the road with lorries and large vehicles, and then it goes on to mention surfaces. There are other surveys by Sustrans did one, DFT have just commissioned one or completed one, which was focused on female cyclists, and the results are always the same. These are the two burning issues for resistance to cycling. Thanks, Christy. So the Frodsham to Helsby cycling walking path and segregation. this came out of the LC WIP, and the LC WIP was based on the concept of origins and destinations, i.e. where people live and where they needed to get to and from, i.e. from my home to my office, to the railway station, kids going to school, etc., etc. And it's based on utility journeys rather than leisure. So areas like Delamere Forest, etc. around here are not really what this is about. This is about getting people on bikes to go to the shops, to go to school, to go to work. And for our area, it was seen as a priority for the children and staff to walk or ride to Helsby High School, which I guess most of you will know the location of this, sitting bang on the A56 with a railway line and a motorway to one side and Helsby Hillside to the other, so quite physically constrained. But I'm delighted to say that by working with the council, and I know this is picked up in Chrissy's next agenda item, the first phase of construction has just commenced, which we're absolutely delighted about. Okay, next slide, please. So if you look at the concept, the whole route concept, the green line that's going through the middle of that map there, in the centre around B and C, you've got the A56. You can see the railway line just to the north west of that, and the M56 and the marshes. And then just to the south west of that, you've got the Helsby Hill. So it's very physically constrained geography of the area, which limits what you can do in certain parts of it. But the principle of a central path with bypasses around the population areas of Helsby and Frodsham, which can act as collectors, is the basic principle. But if you do drill down and look at sections A and F, the details of those bypasses, the concept is highly flawed and hence not a workable solution. So we felt that if we were going to progress this, we needed proper plans. Christy, can I have the next slide, please? So I think the important thing is that we've got shared objectives with Cheshire West and Chester, and we believe that working in collaboration, we can get to those goals more quickly. Hence, we think we need to pick up the baton at times. But without an accurate route alignment study leading to costed plan, this path cannot progress. And really, we need what is often referred to as a shovel-ready plan, something that they could have as a sitting on a shelf, that when pots of money come available from whatever sources that are identified through the work that is done, that we have something that we could make a bid against these pots on. I think the other thing that we've noticed, and I'm sure the council feel it even more than we do, is that the lead times for responses on these invitations to bid are often very, very short. And if you haven't got a scheme that is at this stage, you might miss out on funding opportunities. And so we decided that we would try and take the initiative in a controlled way and get a study done for Helsby. We did all of the exercises, rotor specification, etc., and identified that we needed to raise £13,250 to get a study done from Helsby High School to roughly round the Hornsmill pub area of Helsby. And those that travel through the area will know that there's a lot of development going on in that area. Yeah, that's fine. A lot of development. There's going to be 700 new houses in total in that Tesco area within the next 5 years. So an area of high population that has no separate cycling facilities whatsoever. Thanks, Christy. Oh, sorry, yeah, you've done it. Sorry, go back. So we felt it's important that we got involved and actually do something. Very often in these sorts of meetings, I hear from sister groups, not necessarily cycling sister groups, I would say, when things don't go how we want, a lot of moaning. And so what I felt that we should do instead of moaning is do something. We recognise that there are a few council officers in a position to pick up more tasks, resources are squeezed, and that by doing it, we're likely to reach our destination more quickly. Thanks, Christy. And so we took on the task of raising 13,250 to pay for the professionals to create a detailed plan. That's how we got to the starting line. So this is a how-to. The scheme is delivered on a web-based platform called SpaceHive. You create the project using their templates, they host it and offer coaching and support to get it going. And really, I'm probably a little bit critical of the coaching and support because it took us a long time to get to the starting line. But it does give you a lot of coaching in as much as if your idea is not going to fit with the funds that are available, they can tell you at that stage and stop wasting everybody's time, but also steer you to show how your idea does fit and how you need to align it to the funds that are available. And then it's over to you really. Once you get to the starting line, you publicize your appeal to your community, get people to visit the web page. That's what it's about, is footfall, traffic to your web page, and get people to make funding pledges. And SpaceHive hold those funds until the closing date. And if you reach your target, you get the money and deliver your project. And if you don't, the donors get their funds back. And I have to say, I think that's a very good feature of the scheme, that you're independent, but you've got this escrow type approach sitting between you and your project, so that there's a good deal of regulation. Quite rightly, it stops the system being open to abuse. SpaceHive charge fees, of course, because they've had to put the capital in and the hosting, etc. And it added about 5% to our goal, which was manageable, but it did give us a chance of progressing. And without that platform and without this scheme, we wouldn't be where we are now. So we do need to recognise that for all its flaws, it's a very good scheme. Thanks, Christy. So this was the web page that we went to. This is thankfully taken on closing day when we did reach our target, but all those sections are all on their pro formas. It's very intuitive to put the page together, but to actually cross all the hurdles is where we found the difficulties. Thanks, Christy. So yeah, our observations, it did take too long to get the project live, and we lost time at the front end because we couldn't publicize until we could get the project live, and that was painful. You have to set up a Stripe account. I don't know whether you know, Stripe is a little bit like PayPal. To get the money into your account, it's the platform that they use. Stripe is written for American business commerce, and hence its regulatory, anti-money laundering, etc., restrictions don't lend itself to a group of enthusiastic amateurs in a little rural Cheshire village trying to qualify through their paperwork schemes, and that really did take a lot of time, and actually in truth is still not fully resolved, although we've managed to get over the hurdle. I know other people that Eileen in the scheme that she did through crowdfunding managed to get through that quite easily, so it may be just my incompetence, I'm not quite sure. And I think the third point is the vital one. That if you're going to be successful, prepare your ground. Know exactly what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, have a specification, etc., etc. Next slide, please. So who did we influence? Well, our members and their networks really were the core of it, and we've kept people involved, not just through the crowdfunding, but at every stage of the LC WIP, all the reviews, etc., all of the studies. We've kept people informed. So the fact that we were doing this exercise was just another example of Cycle North Cheshire being active within our community. So we already had a level of engagement through previous activity, which was important. We worked very closely with Helsby Parish Council and Paul Bowers, the local councillor, by talking to them. We emailed local employers with some success and a fair degree of failure, to be honest, and it's an area we need to work on. The Helsby community was really the core of our activity, and we were doing Facebook posts to the community pages weekly. Just a word of caution with Facebook, you inevitably get a lot of backlash and naysaying going on with Facebook. You know, the usual cyclists don't pay road tax and lycra louts and all of this nonsense. What I did find that if you are polite and firm and explain what's at the heart of your objective, i.e. allowing kids to cycle or walk to Helsby High School, they back off very, very quickly, and usually by the rest of the crowd take over and police it for you. But just a word of caution on Facebook. Very strong links to the local primary and secondary schools who were, again, this wasn't new to them. Their relationship with Cycle North Cheshire is good, but they were pivotal in communicating to parents through their newsletters. One of the schools did a little event and raised some money and put it in the pot, which was great. We did posters, wrote articles in Helsby to Hand and Helsby News, did presentation to Rotary Club, etc. So a high level of engagement, which wasn't just new for this task, but for previous tasks as well. Thanks, Christy. So that's just an example of a poster on a previous event. For those of you who do live in the area, you will have seen these. We everything that the council does, the work that was done on the redesign by Sean, I think it was. We're publicising this so that people know what's going on. So these things aren't a shock. And when the roadwork started recently, people were expecting them. And by and large welcome them. Please, Chrissy. So the key learnings. It's not easy, but it is worthwhile. You must prepare. I cannot overemphasize this. You've got to have written agreements in place on exactly what you're going to deliver, what the outcome will be, and know how it's going to be delivered. You've got to have a clear picture of what the costs are, and a comprehensive specification of the work to be affected, or whatever it is you're going to buy. You have to be crystal clear on this. And I think this is where we did fall down a little bit in the early days through miscommunication. If you need to be involved with other bodies, they must have agreed to all of this. And is that my last slide? Yeah, it's a good scheme. You need to prepare with the authority. You've got to actively drive the programme. This won't just happen. You know, you've got to take on responsibility and make it happen, and begin early, because if you begin early and you understand the process, you've got a much better chance of success. And finally, we're going to use the outputs and learning from this exercise to do another similar one once we understand how this one works out. So we're not going to go immediately into a follow-up programme. We want to deliver this one, work with Christy and her team on what was right and what was wrong. And then if we do another one, we can enhance it, improve it, and get it better and better for the future. So that's what we did. We're grateful. We appreciate the support of the council, and thanks.
Thanks so much, Steve. That was so uplifting, I think. What a lovely, positive scheme, and to describe the way in which the process you went through, I think is really helpful to others. I'm just going to bring in some comments, and we've got Eileen Morgan first of all with her hand up. If anybody would like to ask questions or clarification from Steve. Eileen.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Eileen.
Right. Hi. Well, first of all, thanks, Steve, for that presentation. And I didn't find it easy working with Stripe right until the final days and into January as well. Yeah, that was very complicated and difficult with the constant questions and verification issues that they wanted, and everything had to be different. So a passport one time, a driving license another, a utility another, and not to use the same thing for any verification process. So that was quite complicated. I'm very thankful as well to the council for their support. The problem for me now is the massive delays that are taking place in me actually getting going. I wanted to order my equipment as soon as the money was I reached my total and so on, which was early December, and we're now toward the end of January, and I was told in December then that I needed council approval before I can move forward. So I've actually not been able to order anything yet. I've had to pay for insurance and take out licenses and so on from September of last year when all of this started. So those insurances and things are going to start running out, and I still haven't even been able to order my equipment. So I'm concerned about the delay in that, and nobody in the council seems to know who is responsible to give me the go-ahead, the red light. They've said, the green light to go ahead. I've spoken to Peter Grime, who is the access officer, and he said he'll try and find out for me, and that was in December, and he still hasn't been able to find out. So that's a concern for me that, I'm waiting to move ahead. I was hoping to be up and running by Easter, and I can't even order the equipment, which is going to take 12 weeks to actually build the trike for us to be able to have it for use. And I'm getting inquiries from people asking me, when is it starting? So, I don't know, that's now a sticking point, and I don't seem to know why I've got to get further approval to be able to go ahead and order the equipment.
Eileen, thank you for raising that. So to be clear, you're being told by Spacehive that the council needs to approve it, and it hasn't happened, and you're not getting anywhere fast, basically.
No, I've not been told by Spacehive. I've been told by Peter Grime at the council that
Right.
I have to wait for approval from somebody in the council, but we don't know who that person is.
Right. It's my understanding that it's localities, but I'm concerned by what you've just said, so I'm going to follow that up today. Try and get this because it will apply to other people as well if you've had that experience. So
yeah. And I think we're supposed to use the money within a certain length of time of receiving it. So that's what I'm concerned about, that I'm waiting for the production to begin and I can't go ahead.
Okay. Steve, do you want to come in there? Yeah.
Yeah, just on that, Eileen and I know each other quite well. We haven't had that problem at all, but I think that refers back to the point I made about having agreements in place with Christy and her team about the specifics of our project. We actually stumbled across that hurdle probably in August, September. So by the time we got to December, we'd cleared that hurdle almost by accident in hindsight. But it does emphasize the point is have the process in place so that the process can flow. And clearly that's, I think, where you've tripped up this time. But it is absolutely all part of the learning that we're all undertaking at the moment.
I have got the license and the insurance all approved, so I don't understand really what it is. Yeah. Okay.
I can't comment. I have no idea.
No. Mm-hmm.
Eileen, we'll take it as an action today. Try and get you an answer by the end of today, if not today, tomorrow. That's what I'll do. Okay. Thank you for raising it. Tony, can I bring you in there, please?
Yes, Stephen, I just wanted a quick question. I thought it was a very interesting and well thought through presentation and a great initiative. I will admit, as a layperson, I was quite shocked that the actual cost of a feasibility study would be 13,500 quid just for the study. What does it actually cost to actually complete the actual thing?
That's part of the study, Tony, because we haven't got a clue what the cost of construction would be. If you look at what I haven't been privy to the final bill, but I can guess what the final bill, maybe Christy will reveal it in the next agenda item, but what the bill for Netherton Hall to Helsby High School is going to be is very significant. So
the only reason for raising it, Stephen, is more, I keep picking up on, the point that Rose was making before, which is trying to get the ambition fitting the capability. And, I would, when I look at these projects, it's just eye-watering what the cost is to make what to a layperson seems to be incredibly modest goals, which is a mile or two of segregated road space with a few plastic poles, drilled into the ground and making a bit more room for a cyclist. You think, are we talking numbers in the six figures. I mean, hundreds of thousands of pounds. And if that were the case, if I was sitting where Rose is sitting, I'd be saying, one of my goals has got to be, I've got to find a way of driving down the cost massively, like orders of magnitude lower, to get, let's say, a Pareto's approach to safety. So if it costs me 100,000 each time I do a mile to get me 100% of the way there, but it costs me 10 grand to get 80% of the way there, I either stand on my hands, sit on my hands for 10 years, or do the 80. And that's the thing that's going through my head. I mean, I find it incomprehensible that we could afford to do a 13.5 grand assessment per mile of road and then implement it everywhere. There has to be a better way.
I know that Rose will back it up, and I will back that up completely, in as much as there are pots of money available. Cheshire West and Chester have consistently missed out on pitching for these funds. If you look at Warrington, Cheshire East, and other areas in our neighbours, they have won monies from central government funds for these schemes, so that there are pots of money available. But if we're not in a position to pitch on them when they do become available, then we're missing out. But the point that you make is obviously recognised by us, that I pick a number out the air, could be £5 million to actually.
I mean, what is the number you would pick on a judgment call?
You can ask me any number. You're certainly into the millions.
Wow.
In my view.
Wow.
Okay, if Tony, if that's okay, I'm going to bring Christy in.
I was sorry.
Go on, Christy. Go on.
Just Rose want to go first. Apologies, butted in there. I was just going to say, in terms of our Helsby High School scheme, obviously, on paper it looks like quite a small distance, but obviously we've got new lighting to design, and obviously new lighting columns. We've got LED going in as well for efficiency. We've got a toucan crossing going in, which is obviously great to get children across the road safely. And then there's all the other things that we don't see under the ground, all the sort of statutory undertakings, the pipes and the gasworks and the cables that possibly need relocating because they might be too shallow. So there's lots of things that we don't quite see on the surface that are happening under the ground. And just on the Helsby one, ours is funded as part of the Active Travel Tranche 2 schemes from government, and we've got circa 489k contribution to that, but the council's having to match that almost equally, and possibly more, so more than 50% match funding on that one. So you're talking about a scheme almost £1 million. New guidance from government in terms of segregation, and the new standards for cycling has pushed up the costs as well, because of things we can and can't do. So I think cycling schemes going forward are going to be more complex and more costly as well, but obviously really meaningful pieces of equipment to put in as well. But
that's a really helpful perspective for me, and I would think for many other people, is that when you're looking at the cost of implementation for what you might think as a layperson are relatively modest goals, they're actually a lot more complex and a lot more expensive than I, in my mind, thought. So it's almost get that in your head as to what you might be able to achieve before you begin, almost, yeah? Because it's not a limitless pot of money, I know.
And just to support what Christy said there, I mean, some of the schemes that we've had designed, we've had to pause and go back and recheck because when the new standard came out, but also everything that's in the LC Whip has had to have a sense check as well for the same reason. And it's because you want to get the best you can with the money you have available, but sometimes people are frustrated by the delays, but it's a necessary part of what has to be done. Rose, can I bring you in at that point?
Yeah, I'll be very quick, Karen. So Tony, it's really, excuse me, really interesting to sort of hear your commentary. And Steve, that was a brilliant presentation, and I'm so glad that you could sort of deliver that and that level of content you did today. There are, with the LTM 120, the part that Steve started on was safety is the biggest concern, and that's what the LTM 120 tries to achieve, is that segregation. Everyone can cycle on any road. You don't need cycling infrastructure to cycle on a road. But if you want people to feel safe and you want to have those levels in place, then it has to be have that LTM compliance. And I just wanted to really very quickly pick up. You said that we don't, Cheshire East and Warrington have got money, towards active travel schemes. It's not for lack of trying, and it's not for lack of bidding. It's for lack of award. So there's multiple reasons as to why that happens, but we try and we try again. And the reason, Tony, that we are often hamstrung into what we can do and can't do, and we've talked lots about kind of localized pots of money and alternative funding schemes, the volume of money that you need to actually put in a worthwhile scheme that connects the right places, does the right thing and has that compliance, cost so much money that those alternative funding streams are, a couple of armadillos on the road. And then of course we haven't even touched on or talked about the public reaction to reallocation of road space. If you don't build additional and you use what you've got, then there's a reallocation of road space that then you have to model the car movement, and then you look where that's dispersed to, and then you look at the congestion, and then you get the backlash. So there's a frame of this conversation, which is why I'm really pleased that we're having it now, because I don't want us to look like a computer says no kind of council. But the considerations and the indexing that Christy and I and others are doing in the background, the schemes are put forward, are not based on, oh, it's too difficult, we don't want to try. It's well, actually, our understanding is this won't happen or get through because it's not even in the priority. How would we get the funding? Because it's not got a government seal of approval, because it doesn't do what it needs to do across the borough. There's no inequality, poverty, connectivity, all of that stuff that we have to consider that's part of the dialogue around all of this. It's not to say we shouldn't be ambitious and keep trying, and we will, of course, but that dose of reality is unfortunately the lens we have to see things through. So thanks, Tony, and thanks, Steve, for that presentation. More of this, please, definitely. Presentations like that are absolutely where, if they're helpful to you and useful, then we'll, that's what we'd like to see on the agenda. Sorry, Karen.
Thanks, Rose. I'm just mindful that time's pressing on, so if with your permission, I'd like to go on to the next item, the Participate Now item, Rose, which I think you're going to lead us on.
Yeah, it was a really quick point. Christy's got the good stuff today. I was looking at the Participate Now website that we've got for our climate change. It was part of our climate change agenda and the climate emergency. And what I noticed was there was very little on there about transport. And I think one of the biggest roles that this group has got is to be that voice within the community that promotes and pushes walking, cycling and public transport. There's lots about energy and consumption and batteries and tailpipe emissions and stuff, but actually we don't have many advocates on there as talking heads or vox pops on that Participate Now videos about transport and the place of transport in the climate emergency. So it was a bit of a call to arms, really. If you've got some great schemes, I'm thinking like Stephen Perry and the Chester Cycling Campaign and the Bike Buddy scheme that you've got, or anything that you've got going on within your groups that you think sort of worthy of a talking head, so I can get you into that sort of programme of videos and we can start talking about transport more, and that the community can start to see how valid and what consensus we've got about improving accessibility for all and transport options for all. So that's just a little request. I'll come back to the group in an email about it, I think, and just ask for people's nominations, see if we've got anyone who'd like to kind of stand up and be counted in a video about transport, but as part of that climate change agenda. So that was it, Karen.
Yeah, I definitely think there's more we can make of it, and we did start that with Sean, your predecessor, but obviously we kind of lost the impetus a little bit when he left the organisation. So I'm pleased to hear that we can press forward with it. Thanks.
Oh, I think Karen's frozen there.
Sorry, my connection dropped out then. Can you hear me?
Can now.
Okay.
Yes.
I was going to move on to you, Christy, for your updates. I'm going to have a little twiddle with my internet while you're speaking, just to see if I can shore that up a bit.
Okay. Mine's just a bit of a whistle-stop tour, really. I know that the we didn't really want the council to be telling you exactly what's not exactly what's happening at the moment, and be us sort of speaking out to you, and it should be more two-way. So I just need to present. Oh yes, that's fine. So I just need to put it on a slideshow. So it's just a couple of things to update you on, really, once this presentation is sorted. So the first one being the Park and Ride. I think everyone's aware of the issues that park and ride and public transport has faced over the last couple of years in terms of government messaging and how we get people to get back on and feel confident using the services that are provided. You know, they're integral for people to get to jobs and employment, and you know, it's a key part of Chester, particularly in respect to the park and ride. So we did a promotion over the Christmas period, through November through to the start of January, where we did a £1 fare, and we promoted that. So we tried to do a bit of a survey for the people that were using the service at the time to understand, you know, what were the detractors and what were the attractors to the park and ride. And there's still some work to be done on that. To be truthful, we've got to fully reflect on the findings that we achieved. Apologies, it might not be too visible, but this orange line is what the actual passenger growth was between the 25th of November and sort of the Omicron variant rearing its ugly head, should I say. So we showed some really good positive growth in reflection of the park and ride promotion. And this blue line is what we projected would happen had we done nothing. So as I say, we were showing some really good positive kind of growth, given that we had quite a low base as well. But unfortunately, Omicron hit and you know, our numbers decreased again. But, you know, it does show that there is interest and there is some promotion that can be done on the park and ride to get people travelling on it again and feeling confident and using it as part of their travel armoury, as it were. So what we did find is that 45% of the people that travelled did say that it was because of the £1 offer, so that was quite encouraging. But unusually, and it could be to do with the period of which the promotion was, but 57% of people were using it for shopping and only 10.5% for work. So clearly there's a stay-at-home message in terms of those that can work from home as well. So, you know, we're in uncertain times at the moment, but, you know, more things to be unpicked from the information we're finding. Boughton Heath is still our most popular site, which it always historically has been. 43% of those who parked and travelled on the park and ride were travelling alone. So that was interesting, maybe avoiding the parking charge in the city centre. We've still got high incidence of people paying cash rather than contactless or on the app. So that's 36% of people paying cash, and 45% of the passengers usually travelled to Chester city centre alone or car shared. So we were attracting some car drivers, which I think is also interesting and a good sort of base to try and grow the passenger base. We are undertaking a bit of a plan of attack to try and promote the park and ride. We've got a 10-point action plan, which involves looking at, you know, reflecting on our own facilities. What have we done in terms of, you know, site facilities? We tend to get, from a previous survey, we've had a lot of really good positive comments about the buses, the Wi-Fi, the USB, the condition of the buses, the fact they're cleaner than some of the buses on the road, and the drivers are really friendly. Some of the detractors that we get back is sometimes the vegetation's overgrown at the car park, and the lighting hasn't worked and things like that. So things that we need to reflect on. So we've got a plan to try and promote it, to better maintain it, and to turn around its fortunes, really. And we've got a piece of work that we need to undertake in terms of the contract going forward and what that might look like for the park and ride and Chester in the future. The picture that I started to describe, is just it's in the Stagecoach depot, but it's just been undertaken its new livery. So we've got 12 of the buses, I think, are being rebranded, so they're supposed to be reflecting the environmental nature of it and some of the historic sort of attributes that Chester has. So you may start to see those on the road going forward. There's certainly one that's been done, and they need to be done incrementally because we've only got one spare vehicle on park and ride, so we can't do it en masse. So that's something to look out for going forward. As Steve mentioned, we are on site with Helsby High School, or the cycle lane outside Helsby High School, should I say, and this is looking up towards the school from Howey Lane type area up to the school. So this is on the A56. It's funded, part funded by DFT's Active Travel Tranche 2 monies, and as I say, it's part of the local cycling walking infrastructure plan. Started on site on the 4th of January, and we're hoping to conclude it by the end of March, but with unknown unknowns, it could be sort of Easter time. So we're looking to upgrade the cycleway into a safer segregated route, separated from traffic by a curbed area, and it's LTM1 compliant, LTM120 compliant. There are areas where historical roads maybe don't fit with LTM120 as snugly as new infrastructure, but wherever we can, we are being compliant to the new legislation and working around it where we can't. So it's a widened footpath. It'll hopefully encourage pedestrians and cyclists, or more pedestrians and cyclists from Helsby High School, and also between Helsby and Frodsham when Steve's scheme hits the ground. We're putting in new facilities for a toucan so that users can cross safely from one side of the road to the other. Currently, there's just a bridge structure, which isn't always convenient if people are walking to the opposite end of the area to catch a bus. Quite a detour, so that's quite good. And we are obviously aligning this with our LC WIP. This scheme is snugly in our LC WIP, so it's one of the first schemes that we're delivering from that. And as I say, we're hoping to complete that by Easter. This is obviously just a photo of some of the lighting. Well, you can't see it obviously, but the lighting upgrades that were taking place, and some of the sort of works that were required to do so. E-scooter trial, just for information that DFT have extended or given us permission to extend the trial to the 31st March 2022. And this isn't necessarily unique to Chester. DFT want to gather more information to get an understanding. Some schemes were later to hit the ground than ours, so the data hasn't come forward. So DFT really want that extra time to explore the data from a post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID scenario, to understand, the usage and the issues that are cropping up as part of the trials. So we're saying that so far over 150,000 miles have been undertaken on the e-scooters, which I'm led to believe is more than 6 times the circumference of the Earth. We have 130 scooters in 47 dockless bays across the city, and it's accessible on a pay-as-you-go process via a mobile app with our partner Ginger. And we have about 14,500 registered local users, with one person undertaking 301 rides. So somebody really likes it out there. We have 74,800 journeys been taken to date, and they're from a different start and end point, so they're not sort of circular or routine. So that's quite interesting fact. Ginger have done a deal, if I can say that, with Dandies, so that we're getting the batteries charged up by solar power. So we're using Chester Sunshine to power up the e-scooters. So that's good. And we have some regulars and some particular areas within the city where they seem to be more popular. So Garden Lane and Whitefriars seem to be the most popular sort of places where people access the e-scooters at the moment. So as I say, the trials continue until the 31st of March, and we'll update once we know more really on that. Just by way of a quick update, so I think there was a reference to before about how we're perhaps not as successful at gaining funding from other sources. So I think in some respects that's true, but we were successful with the A51 scheme between Tarvin and Chester. That was circa £8 million, and the council drew down local growth funding for that. But more relative or more relevant, should I say, to walking and cycling is the A5117 scheme, which has just been completed, and that was about £1.6 million in total, with local growth funding being attracted, which was awarded through the LEP, but DFT monies. And this supplements £1 million on Sutton Way Boulevard and £1.2 million that was used for canal towpath upgrades between Ellesmere Port and Chester. So there is some successes there. There's obviously more to be done. So this scheme on the A5117 was about connecting people to employment and jobs as well. So the employment area around the Ellesmere Port industrial area, and also connecting to the city centre with the other infrastructure improvements that we've done in the past in terms of Stanley Lane, Sutton Way Boulevard and the canal. So just to advise that this scheme has completed. We have a few snags that we still need to do within the defect period. And also we've done some supplementary works on Britannia Road, which signalling upgrades, bus stop upgrades, and we've done the final surface dressing. There were some issues with statutory diversions, which I mentioned earlier, which increased our costs and delayed our programme a little bit, but we've got there and it's now open and on the ground. So that's good news, I feel. And then the final bit, just to update you on, was the bus service improvement plan. So we submitted our bus service improvement plan to government, to DfT, on the 30th of October, and then we immediately had to launch into the next stage of that, which was to develop an enhanced partnership plan and scheme for delivering the bus service improvement plan with our bus operators. Originally, DfT gave us till the 31st of, sorry, apologies for my spelling there, it gave us to the end of 31st of March to submit it, but we've recently had an announcement that we can submit a draft version by the end of April. So what that means is we are working with the operators. We've put together a plan of how we want the bus service improvement plan to work. We're waiting on a funding settlement, which kind of makes it difficult to prioritise at the moment. But one of the things that we are clear about is we need a period of recovery for the bus service, because, you know, as mentioned under the Park and Ride, there's been a really traumatic period for public transport in terms of how it bounces back from COVID. So that's the priority, but equally there's issues on ticketing, there's information, there's bus stop infrastructure, whether that's junction upgrades to allow buses to go through more quickly. But unfortunately that hinges quite heavily on the funding settlement, which was alluded to earlier. So we embraced the bus service improvement plan, we embraced national bus strategy and Bus Back Better, thinking, you know, this is absolutely something we need to get behind because of the climate change emergency, poverty and truth, and all those other threads that transport really weaves into. And we may be in a position where we get less funding than we thought. There was 3 billion allocated to the bus service improvement plans. And we think that there's less than 1.2 to 1.4 billion at the moment, and we don't know what the funding settlement will be. So we will keep you updated when we know a little bit more. And the only other thing I've just put on there was the highway code that you mentioned earlier, Councillor Shaw. So I can post this link into the chat if that's helpful, but just to back up what you said earlier, really. So I'll leave it there, but happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chrissy. That really was a whistle-stop tour, an awful lot of work, and spoken about very quickly. And I am mindful of the time, but I do want to bring people in for questions and discussion. So can I bring Vanessa in first of all?
There you go. Hi there. Sorry, it's Tony again. We're sharing a laptop, but I'm happy to be Vanessa if you like for the day. I think I'll just move my mouth. Yeah, we just want to pick up on the Park and Ride, really. Obviously, great that there's been an action and a survey done, but it's clearly just a survey of existing users and their sort of response to the current facilities. I think, you know, one of the ambitions of this forum really should be to think about Park and Ride and its future in the overall city sort of transport plan generally. Whilst the survey is good, and we spoke to our CRAG members, we felt that the survey was very, very narrow in terms of what it was asking. I do note that Rose put something on the chat that this is going to be expanded, but we certainly feel quite strongly that it should be considered, certainly in light of the work that Andy Farrell's done, for example, on what the future of Park and Ride should be as integrated transport hubs. You know, things like a move away from diesel, a move to solar power. Can we make the Park and Rides far more attractive in terms of electric vehicle charging points? How do we consider what we've been debating all morning, which is multi-modes of travel, you know, alternative modes of travel, e-scooters? And the other thing is just making them, as the responses come back anyway, I think, Chrissy, just more comfortable and convenient for users. You know, even if I could grab a coffee there, it would be brilliant. Sounds like a tiny thing, but it'd be good. So, you know, CRAG would be happy to work with you to question its members via perhaps another survey, but perhaps one which is put together as a sort of more rounded thought piece, a slightly broader piece of thinking. I'm not looking to put Andy on the spot, but certainly the work that he's done and that we think is fantastic, and we've spoke to him about. So, and we think it's a key, really, piece.
I think when you look at York and Oxford, you know, that as sort of comparable and historic and university cities, you can really see what is possible. And you know, sort of I've visited sites in those cities over the years, and it just makes it so difficult to use your car that you have to use the park and ride. And it's because the facilities are there. It's not about the frequency or the cost. It's about, you know, sort of feeling safe. I mean, I recently visited our park and ride sites, and they are like abandoned Soviet era military bases. I didn't feel safe there during the day. So, you know, certainly I wouldn't consider using that, you know, in the dark, in the winter time. Go to York, there's coffee shops, there's, you know, sort of, it's just fabulous. So not wanting to do us down, but wanting to get it right, because I think, you know, as Tony's just said, and as Andy's mentioned in his Smart Mobility report, you know, the park and ride facilities are pivotal to what we're trying to achieve and how it integrates into the One City plan and the whole future. And meanwhile, other cities are accelerating into, you know, York's going to be car free from next year. You know, so the other cities have clean air zones. It all fits together. And also sort of following on from what Tony was saying, and I think it might be a bit sort of premature on my behalf, but on my part, but, you know, sort of having sort of the group here, the task force, sort of going off and doing sort of their own workshops to then come back to report to the task force on a sort of bi-monthly, quarterly basis, I think would be really, really useful, because there's so much that we're all trying to achieve that really sort of just meeting bi-monthly. And today's presentations have been fantastic, but a lot of it isn't sort of directly sort of relevant to say what CRAG are concerned with, and I know it's Chester City Centre specific, so interesting, but not really useful to us in terms of what our goals are and what we're trying to achieve. I hope that makes sense.
Can I come in there, Vanessa? I mean, everything you said is really valuable, and this is one example of, I think, you know, we were talking about work programs and subgroups and things where this would fit very, very well into that, because there isn't time to unpack all of those things now, but you know, there's 100 things we could say on how what we can do to improve what's in the plan, and how this group can add value to that. So can I put that as a suggestion for one of the subgroups to look at park and ride?
Yeah, absolutely, great stuff. Yeah,
I mean, and just to say, it was in the capital programme for investment in park and ride sites before the pandemic, and it has somewhat been delayed by that, but as far as I know is still on the table for capital investment. So it's a huge opportunity for the city, and it'd be really good to have a subgroup on it.
Brilliant, thanks Cameron.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else want to ask Christy any questions, or indeed merging the next item here, any suggestions for subgroup or something that, you know, as we talked about before, sort of trying to pull a work programme together. I think we've got the start of it there now with park and ride. I've got Tony, do you want to come back in?
Yes, please. I was just wondering, Christy, you know, I thought that presentation, particularly around the number of journeys done with e-scooters, was staggering, far greater than I thought. And I kind of really do think that if you could convert that into CO2 saved and car journeys saved and put a perspective on that, I think it would be quite amazing to think what you've saved in doing that. But the second thing for me was more thinking about, you know, do you think that Ginger stroke Dandies, do you think they are optimistic about having the appetite to extend this to maybe e-bikes that I might use? I mean, I'm not a huge scooter fan. I couldn't put my shopping on it, but I think I could on an e-bike. I mean, do you think there's appetite out there or not?
I think that's something we just need to explore, really, if I'm honest. I think it's not, I think that ties into, potentially what we do with the Park and Ride and the potential hubs there and Chester's Gateway and what the sort of draw and attraction of all these different aspects are, really. So I can't say whether it be Ginger or another provider, but certainly I think it's one thing that's on the radar that we need to investigate.
And I think the other thing I was picking up on Stephen's presentation when he was using that research to show that one of the obstacles to cycling is, roads that are, quite bad. Anyone who's cycled in London on an e-bike will tell you that the tires are so big and the suspension is, you feel you could, the roads are horrendous, but it's amazing how big fat tires suddenly makes it not as dangerous as you thought it would be on a normal bike. So there's a positive, I think, with e-bikes in that you feel actually they're heavy, they don't get knocked out of line, when you hit a bump. It could actually encourage people to kind of get out on the road, whereas they might not with their existing bikes. So that's just a thought.
Tony, it's a really interesting point, and I think this is where we need to make sure that we're a bit more joined up, because I know the Northgate Working Group and the Climate Emergency Group are looking at e-bike schemes for Chester, and I think perhaps that is another sort of thing that we could perhaps flesh out in a future meeting, and I'd need to take that away and talk to colleagues about how best to do that, but definitely think that that's worthwhile.
I'd love to support it any which way I can, because I really do think that it solves quite a few of our problems at low cost. Yeah. And if you combine that with what Tony and Vanessa were talking about with Park and Rides and Andy Farrell, you could get such commercial interest in that doesn't require necessarily council investment in making those hubs into something along the lines of Oxford or York, and they're almost self-sustaining, and it'll make it more attractive and everything else. That might get it used a bit more.
Okay, thanks, Tony.
Cheers.
Can I bring Frank in next? Hi, Frank.
Yeah, hello, everybody. You know what I'm going to say. I find this to be very city orientated. There are about 240,000 people who live outside of the city, and most of them are fairly badly served in terms of being able to access public transport. There are very few bus services. The stations are few and far between. I know I'm working with Christy and her team on the DFT study about loneliness, but it goes much wider than providing just e-scooters or e-bikes or Park and Ride. It's about really looking at the whole picture and saying, well, how can we help all of the people who live outside of Chester become part of Chester? Because to be honest, and I know I've said this before, we feel left out. And I live in a very small rural community, and we're trying to do something ourselves, but it is an uphill struggle. And I thank Christy and the team for actually helping support us to do it. Enough, said enough.
Well, that's the positive there, Frank, that you are getting the team's attention, and you are having your we are putting forward a bid for your area. So, but I take the point entirely about the rural areas, and it is, it's a very important one. Garfield, can I bring you in next, if I may, and then I'm going to go to Rose.
Okay, thanks very much, Chair. And it's a direct response really to Frank as well, coincidentally, because the question I was going to ask is that if you look at item 4 of the terms of reference, one of the suggestions was that I don't think it was a suggestion, I think it was an intention, that we would set up subgroups for some of the other areas of the borough.
Yeah.
And we had Ellesmere Port and Neston and Winsford, Northwich, etc. They were just examples. So what I'm keen to understand is how we can start on those subgroups and what particular projects would interest people like Frank and others who would welcome something being done in zones which are not city oriented. and I think that that's something I would be particularly keen on developing and getting those groups moving forward. So I think, I don't know, Chair, how best to canvass these thoughts, but I think I'd certainly welcome them.
Okay, thanks, Garfield. And we are, you know, we are on item 5 now, discussing the work programme. So, I mean, I don't know if Rose has any suggestions about how best we do that, because I don't want to, you know, sort of try organising officer time. That's really up to you.
Yeah, no, I think, and Frank, you're not forgotten on this group. You know, I did say to the people who are here within the core membership, you know, we can't be too Chester centric and we can't be modal centric. We're an integrated sustainable travel team that covers the borough. So Frank, you know, we've actually employed consultants to support us to get that EOI in for that tackling loneliness for displaced communities and rural communities. So, you know, you have it with our actions, how important, you know, we do place. It's just that the conversation today has happened to be about Park and Ride. It doesn't mean that next week or next time we talk about DRT and we talk about the implementation of demand responsive transport or the Rural Mobility Fund, anything you want to bring to the table. And that's the purpose of the work programme. Let's make it balanced, let's make it borough wide, and let's make it multimodal. So just come forward, you're responsible for changing that and being part of that discussion. So it's just that Park and Ride is what we wanted to present on because we've just done a survey on it. So it's got front of mind for everybody. I think the best way of doing this, Jess isn't here today because she had a clash with Chair's looking after someone else's meeting. But what I would really urge people to do is I'll just Jess up for this. But if what we've discussed today, you've got your brains going and you've thought about the debate that we've had and you've thought about how healthy the conversations can be. If you've got topics like Park and Ride, Frank, you know, like demand responsive transport, Rural Mobility Fund, anything like that, if you push it through to Jess in the first instance, and then what I'll do is I'll sit down with Jess Christie and we'll go from a long list. And then what I'll do is go to the core members and say, from this, what would your priorities be? So that we've got a balanced view, because on our core group, we have got a geographic and modal representation. So we should be able to do that with quite a collegiate approach to it. So in the first instance, email Jess. Jess Chambers. I'll put her email in the chat now. Sorry, Christy, you better come in.
I was just going to say, saving Jess's inbox. Do you want to use transport strategy? Because I can get one of the team to monitor it. That's all I was going to say.
Sorry, I forgot
that in the chat instead. No, it's absolutely fine.
Use our shared mailbox, and then everyone's got access to that, so it's not just down on one person. And then we'll long list to short list with the core group, and then we will push it out to you to see what kind of priority you want, and then we'll set up as many months forward planning as we can of this meeting. Can I just ask a question to the group? Christie's update. Then we're really aware that we don't want to be us talking. Can I just ask, was that helpful? Do you want that to remain on as an agenda item? I've got a thumb up from Tony. Yeah, and Garfield and Frank. John, you're on camera. So Andy, brilliant. That's fantastic. So we won't make it too much about lots coming in, but we will make sure that we're updated, because we're expecting mini Holland. You know, we've got the GP prescribing through. This EOI has gone forward on this tackling social exclusion and loneliness with transport. So there's a ton of stuff I think you'd find interesting, as long as you don't think that it's too much of us putting in. Fantastic, that's great. Okay, so Christy's put the email address in. Get your ideas across to us and we can now start programming that in. So Karen, that's just what I wanted to make sure we got a process.
Thanks, Rose. That's really helpful. And thanks, Christy, as well for all the work you're doing and for the presentation. And we've got just a few minutes left for any other business at this stage. Has anybody got anything else they wish to raise? Christy?
I was sorry, checking I wasn't muted. I was just thinking in terms of my misunderstanding on the earlier item in terms of programming the meetings. I just thought it might be useful if there was some set meetings that we could work to. It's probably easy to work around yours and Karen's diary, yours and Rose's diary, sorry, in terms of at least having the next meeting set really. So it's not, you know, coming in a week or so and people can plan around it, whether it's during the day or whether it's evening or whatever. That's all I was thinking.
So do you want a view from others, or I mean, what
I was thinking, sorry, with the Sustainable Transport Task Force, we set like every Thursday of the month, which was too regular, every second Thursday of the month and a set time. So at this time, I think we're looking at, you know, a set time maybe, or a set date, but maybe it's the time that varies. At least we've got that programme to work to. I just wondered if that would be helpful, or whether it's worthwhile just, you know, planning next meeting in March without really knowing what that date might be. But
I think it might also be helpful for us to sort of have some preliminary or provisional dates to the end of the year, because diaries fill up quickly and we've got all sorts of other council meetings in the diary already. I know that the civic year diary is coming forward for the next year very soon. So any particular views on the time, or whether you know, we've agreed the frequency to be doodle poll's a good idea. Who said that? Steve. Can we do a quick doodle poll? Not now, obviously not now, but if we can send it out, that would be really helpful. Vanessa, I'm mindful you've got your hand up. Did you want to come back in, or is that a legacy hand?
No, I did want to come back in. Sorry,
okay.
Karen.
Apologies.
Just following on from Frank's comments earlier, I'm just being mindful of the fact that taxis and private hire is something that's regulated by the authority. And I know we're looking towards making vehicles cleaner and greener, but bearing in mind that they do sort of fill in the gaps, particularly sort of for the elderly, the disabled, rural communities, and also the nighttime economy. I think at some point sort of they need to sort of be part of the conversation, just to sort of understand how they fit in at the moment and obviously moving forward.
Yeah, okay. So we have to give that some thought, because the sort of controls or influence that we have is not as great as people might think. And it is an issue at the moment, and I'll probably, Rose, can we take an action to discuss with the licensing team and see what they think? I mean, statutory licensing is statutory, obviously, and that's sort of our role in it. But I think there's probably some value we may be able to add here, but we'll take it away and discuss with the team, the licensing team.
Just so we have the conversation, it would be great.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Tony, can I bring you in?
Yeah, hi. I didn't know whether I was muted or not there. Sorry. It's just harking back to the presentation that Stephen made, and he did highlight that one of the obstacles to people using alternative means of transport, particularly cycling, is safety. I don't know whether this is something that is actively being considered, which is average speed cameras. I mean, personally, I'm quite shocked, and I was really quite shocked the other day walking over Hoole Road Bridge, kind of about 5 o'clock in the evening, just how vulnerable I felt just walking on the footpath because of the speed at which people were racing over that bridge. And when I go over the Grosvenor Bridge, if I'm actually doing 20 in a car, I normally have people beeping me behind, Are they horrific cost, Christy?
Do you want me to
respond? Is it something that should be considered as part of the agenda to improving safety on the road, to enable people to take the leap to using alternative means of transport? That's just a thought, that's all.
Christy, do you want me to respond to what on the basis of what I can, what I know? Okay, so
it's going to be horrific, isn't it, Karen?
There have been, how can I explain this very quickly? A large number of schemes that were considered and filtered down. And we are liaising with the Police and Crime Commissioner's office at the moment around Christleton. But there are other areas of the borough that would require some attention, and we do need to bring back to the fore, I think. But the cost is horrific. It is horrendous. It's probably more than the cycling infrastructure we were talking about earlier. Christy, is there anything you want to add there?
Not so much that I'd add anything of note. I think there is a road safety camera partnership, isn't there, between ourselves, Warrington and Cheshire East, and maybe it's worth me getting some further information and feeding back. Obviously, there's certain criteria that we'd need to have in front of us before we made a decision, and obviously sometimes the costs also prohibit that. So I don't feel well enough informed to give you a confident answer, so I'll take that action back if that's okay.
Okay.
Come back.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tony. Vanessa, do you want to come back?
Only to say that King Street could always do what Whitefriars has done and set up a community speed watch. The thrill of wearing high vis, it's highly recommended.
Yeah, point made. I think there's more of a thrill going at 20 over the Grosvenor Bridge and seeing 100 cars behind you.
No, top speed on Whitefriars has been 41 miles an hour, as recorded by the Bushnell speed gun.
Gosh. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll bring that update and discussion to a future meeting. Are there any other questions that people may wish to raise? I am mindful of the time. I have got another meeting very shortly, so I will have to close shortly. Any other questions? Okay, thank you everyone for your attendance and for your input. And if you can email Transport Strategy with your suggestions, that'd be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye-bye. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Apologies if anyone's still on. I need to stop the meeting so that I can end the recording. So thanks for your time and your attendance, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.